as Prophet ﷺ, as the Quran says, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. That if you were really harsh and really harsh-hearted and stern, لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ, they would have fled from you. فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ, and forgive them and ask forgiveness for them, and شَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, and consult them in the affair, in whatever the thing it is. And that's the other side of it. And the Quran talks about that, again, if you treat people right, that those between you who there was enmity and hatred, they will become كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. They will become like your most deepest friend.
Welcome to another show of the I Love Monday podcast. Today's guest needs no introduction. He's the Islamic Finance guru, Ibrahim Khan. Welcome to the show.
Oh, Jazakallah khair. It's a pleasure to be here.
It was really nice talking off air for a bit as well. And somehow our offices are 5 minutes away from each other.
I know you've got fantastic offices. I like the strategy as well, because I was thinking about it. It's an estate agent, right? But you're in the property space. It's quite I found a number of estate agents are kind of like they do a bit of both, right?
It's the front.
Yeah.
not in the criminal side.
I know. It's like the way that you get the deals, right?
Yeah, it's the best
One of the ways.
Yeah, one of the ways. So Ibrahim, tell us about your journey so far, from when you were a child growing up.
So we start in the year of our Lord, 1990. So I grew up born in Pakistan, came to the UK when I was about 5, and spent a lot of time moving around in different places because my dad was a doctor, so we moved around a lot. But then we ultimately settled in the northeast, so Middlesbrough, Stockton-on-Tees, Thornaby to be precise, that area. So a lot of my primary school, secondary school was in that area. And then went off to uni, studied PPE, Philosophy, Politics, Economics at Oxford. And then that's where I met Mohsin, my co-founder. And then, our corporate journey started. I can go into that as well if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
So at university, we were thinking a lot about what we wanted to do, after university. And me and Mohsin were both quite keen on Islamic finance and investment from the very start. He's a Gujarati, so what do you expect? And we decided, okay, let's try and explore this space a bit more. So after university, I did a master's in Islamic banking and finance. I also started my Alim course in Leicester with Sheikh Riyad al-Haq.
Okay.
And it was in that year that I thought, okay, you know what? Let's go for corporate law, and that will give me a good in to understanding how Islamic finance works. And if it doesn't, seem to be working out, if it's not interesting, then I can always, law has lots of other exit routes. So that's where I found myself in law. Trained at Ashurst and then Debevoise, and then IFG started off as a side hustle and grew, and then here we are today.
So was there a lot of emphasis based on education when you were younger?
Yes, I guess, but I think it was, so both of my parents were doctors. My mum was a stay-at-home mum after a while, and my dad continued. So I think education was obviously important to them and was emphasized, and they did a lot of extracurricular type QMon maths and HIF and Saturday schools and tuition and all that sort of thing. So they definitely did put a lot of effort in. I don't think they were as perhaps focused and pushing us at home to do revision and to do studying. I think that was kind of a natural thing that just happened, alhamdulillah. And but I think one thing that I did take away from my parents is that you need to try and do something for the Muslim community, for the ummah, for the wider community. That was something that my mum in particular really drilled into us from the very start, which I think has shaped the rest of my life really, if I think about it.
What made you choose Islamic finance over other Islamic or community ventures?
So I think it comes back to what I enjoy and what I'm good at. and what there is a need for. So there might be a need for lots of other things, but if that's not necessarily something that I can dedicate the next 20 years to, then it probably isn't going to be something that will give an optimal outcome of my time and resources and energies and what I have to give. So finance and investments is something that I naturally enjoy, and there is a need for it. So it's kind of obvious that that made the most sense for me.
Did you speak to anyone before starting IFG as your side hustle to just have a soundboard and speak to someone about your ideas?
We spoke to loads of people. So we spoke to, in 2019, me and Mohsin, we were still in corporate law. We decided that we want to leave latest by December 2020. As it happened, we left by the end of the year. So rather than 24 months, it was within 11 months or so that we left. And in that period, the thing with law is that it starts quite late in the day. So you work late, but lawyers, it's not unusual for them to rock up at 10:30, 11. It's quite normal. So in that morning period between 8 and 9:30, I had a bit of a window. And so every single day, pretty much, I would be meeting random people. There used to be I think it was called an espresso coffee shop off Bank, which is now closed down. But that was my regular haunt. So if you can imagine, you meet on average, let's say 3 people a week, you multiply that out over even 30 weeks in a year, that adds up to about 90, 100 people. And if you continue doing that, all sorts of avenues open up. So a bunch of those people were people that some of them were people that we ended up hiring, some of them ended up people we do business with, others ended up being mentors that you can learn from. And so it was I guess it's in the constant exchange of ideas that you can sift out what the path should be.
So what was your original idea? Was it just to create a platform? Because Islamic Finance Guru is like a content creating machine.
Yeah.
So is it just to create a platform and a hub where people can come and get the Islamic finance knowledge from?
It's like a hydra. It's got multiple heads. So when it started, Islamic Finance Guru was just a blog. So just written content, very dodgily designed by me and Mohsin. And then we started adding on other things like, video and audio started coming in. And it was still at heart, the content was the thing that drove it. We just continued doing it for maybe 4 years before we even thought about monetizing it in any way, shape or form. And the monetization actually happened as almost like a accident. Like we didn't ever really think about this is the thing we're going to monetize. It just kind of, took place. And then after that, it became a case of, you've got a blog, you're a creator, I guess is what they would call it today. How do you monetize that? And there's multiple routes that, your classic creator would use to monetize. And so we started, the first one we did was courses. That's a very common thing that you'd see. And some of our courses, alhamdulillah, they still do quite well. They still tick along. Next, we went into affiliate and referral type stuff. And we found that didn't really work too well because I think the Islamic fintech ecosystem is still pretty small. And I don't think there's, frankly, enough money in it for it to be worthwhile. And so then we switched to doing our own products. So we did Islamic wills, which is something that we still do. We've done over, I think, 5,000 wills at this point. We do a lot of the wills in the background for people like Islamic Relief and Muslim Hands, Muslim Aid, NZF. Lots of the charities, they use us in the background. And that was okay, but what we found again there was that the scale wasn't massive because, again, it's a Muslim community, small number of people, and, it kind of caps out at a certain point. And alongside all of this, we'd been doing an angel syndicate where we'd been investing in early stage startups. And
as in personally?
Personally, family and friends. And the whole thing just kept on growing and growing. And then we got our FCA umbrella license from someone else. We started, doing that a bit more, I guess, formally called IFG.VC at the time. And then it was, I guess, sometime early last year, we got our own license. And then it became Cur8 Capital, and we became a platform that does a lot more than just venture capital. So now we do basically everything when it comes to private markets investing, all the kind of deals that, I would only, I would see in passing when I was in my corporate law days as a funds formation lawyer. I'd work on them, but you'd never be able to invest in them. It's those kind of funds and those kind of investments that we want to bring to the Muslim community. Anyone really, but in particular, it needs to be Sharia compliant, and that has, I think, really clicked. Right? So a lot of the stuff that we'd experimented with before, and it's a painful thing. You actively, deprioritize that, and you narrow your focus onto this one thing, and I think that has really helped. Like the whole thing has just accelerated a lot since we did that.
So, when you were initially starting off Islamic Finance Guru and you left your corporate law jobs, did you face any negative feedback from either your mentors or those people you're using as a soundboard and say, look, it's maybe not a good idea? Because Islamic Finance in 2020 is still small. It's still small now, but in 2020 it was a lot smaller. Now you're getting a lot more, like Stride Up have come, Offer have come, and the different kind of products. But then it was still the Al Rayyan Bank and the Gatehouse.
Yeah. So I think some people were surprised. I think some of my family members may have been, slightly worried that, why am I chucking in this 6-figure, corporate job where there's a clear pathway to, potentially making millions, and, cutting my salary by like, 2/3 or 3/4 and doing this. I think that, so there was some reluctance there. I think some perhaps VCs or some investors may have thought that perhaps there isn't as much potential here as they might have thought for other areas. But to be honest, I think by and large the reception that we received was very positive. And even with our angel investors, who we raised about 250,000 from the first time we started on this journey, even they, it was raised very quickly within hours, because they bought into what we were trying to do. And at that point, IFG was nowhere like it is today. So I think they really backed us at a time when we didn't have anywhere near as much going for us as we do today. They backed an idea, I think, at core, and a vision of the world, or a set of beliefs that they thought need to come about. All in all, I think we've been very lucky that overall I think people have been pretty supportive.
So your vision you had in 2020, would you say it's now translated into 2023, or is it kind of a bit different?
So the mission has stayed exactly what it is, which is we want to help the Muslim community level up financially. The core planks of it, which is content, have stayed exactly the same as well. And funnily enough, I think the value proposition at the time was that we are this kind of one-stop shop where you can come and you can find all the investments you need to do, and you can make the investments as well. In a weird way, that we've kind of come full circle on that, because that's kind of what we do now at Cur8 Capital, but focus just on the private markets. But that's not at all by design. I think we've iterated and pivoted and tried lots and lots of different things over the years, whilst still you're still trying to chip away at that core problem, the core audience, the core problem, the core mission, and just trying to figure out how best do we actually help Muslims level up financially that really resonates and really scales.
So how do we help Muslims financially?
So I think that there's if you think about it from just a mathematical perspective, there's the average net worth in the world is around $78,000, $80,000. According to Credit Suisse, they do this annual report, and the Muslim average is roughly a fifth of that, so about $16,000. And So the mission for us, mathematically stated, is let's get Muslims from 16,000 to 80,000. So that's a 5x increase. And if you model that out, there are, really there's only two ways to do that. The first is by taking wealth that already exists within the Muslim community's pockets and growing that at a faster rate than everyone else on the street is growing it, because you need to increase it at an increasing rate so that you can start catching up. That's number one. Number two is by giving your Muslim entrepreneur more wealth through value creation and through entrepreneurship, so that there is new wealth that comes into the Muslim community. And you do that, and that creates big jumps in the wealth, that has, potential. And so now you kind of roll that back. Okay, so you think that, just helping everyday Muslims increase their wealth consistently is important, and helping entrepreneurs is important. Fine. So, and what we do is a bit of both, right? So we focus a lot on this. We want to help Muslims make above average returns. And that's why we focused on private markets, where historically that's where you see the above average returns. That's why, we're focused on, those kind of performing fund managers, or those kind of deals that are hard to easily access for someone who doesn't have, the relationships, but also the structuring and like commercial know-how about how to go about it. And then on the other side, on the venture capital side, we back startup founders. And, we were discussing earlier around private equity. We back entrepreneurs who need a different type of financing, not venture capital financing, but private equity financing. So we do that as well. And we're now exploring other routes of financing as well. So if you can back these entrepreneurs and they can create big jumps in wealth, that's very material to our mission. And if you do that, if every Muslim just did that consistently for the next 35 to 40 years, we will be back on a level playing field.
Why is it important to do that jump from the average net worth of $16,000 to $80,000 for a Muslim?
It's a great question. So I think that, it comes back to, purpose in life, and, what are you here for? For me, my faith is really important. So what does my faith tell us about, what should we be doing on earth? And I think, Islam says to us that we should effectively be looking to bring about what He, the Almighty, wants on earth. And I think that comes through four different dimensions. One is political, the other one's economic, the other one's spiritual, and the other one is cultural. And culture includes media, fiction, non-fiction, drama, TV, everything. And all of those four things, they need to come together to bring about a world in which, human beings can flourish, can achieve what, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would want, what is best for them, and create an environment that is conducive, for good. And in amidst all that, we fit into the economic bit. And, from an economic perspective, you need to have a certain level of wealth in order to be able to, affect change. And wealth is not really something that is like it's not a stagnant thing. The wealth is, if you think about everything around us, that we're looking at, this camera, this building, the roads outside, to put another lens on it, you're looking at money.
Yeah.
Like that's actually what you're looking at. And even these kind of, there are these kind of invisible ties between us all that are, relationships that are governed by money, right? So if you have, let's say, a member of your team that, you as a company, as a director have hired, that is an economic transaction. And so, if Muslims are at a certain level with their economics or their wealth, you're only going to have a certain level of potential to be able to affect change in the world around you. So I think that's really important. So I guess it's a power thing. But I think the second thing is, it has multiple other corollaries as well. So, health outcomes, education outcomes, even outcomes such as spirituality and like morality. If you're someone who's very poor, who's like living, day to day, the standard of your morality, like, from studies has shown that it gets a bit more patchy for obvious reasons. So there's a whole bunch of things around economics and wealth which make it, something that's important. But that isn't to say, of course, that you should, make wealth your master and that it is the be all and end all. For me, as I like to think that, we've just discussed, is very much a means to an end. It's the end that's most important.
There's a lot of within the Muslim community that push wealth. Even we hear in speeches in the mosque that push wealth towards a negative connotation, or money is the root of all evils. But then the way I look at it is, there's a reason why certain charities go to South Asian countries or Muslim countries who are full of poverty, and they do their missionary work there to get people to convert from Muslim to other faiths. Because when someone is in poverty and someone's saying, listen, we're from the Almighty and here's a house and whatever, naturally a person's going to be a bit more inclined, and they might think, well, my Lord didn't give me this and this Lord is. And I think that's another key reason why at least having a comfortable lifestyle or working towards a comfortable life is important for Muslims, not necessarily to amass wealth. I think amassing wealth is more of a community thing, like you guys are doing. We were speaking off of Raise from Amazing, building a community which fits into your politics, economy, because really and truly we can't affect politics without wealth. And I think it was on your podcast actually with Sufyan, I heard him saying, in fact, the masjid communities or the committees and trustees should go to entrepreneurs to ask for advice, because they're the ones who've raised something from ground up. Whereas if they have that mindset and they have that vision and foresight. So I think there's a number of reasons why wealth is important, but like you said, not a master.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. I think that, we sometimes, there's a delicate balance when it comes to the relationship with wealth, and it depends on the person as well, because there are, various different scriptures in Islam, the nusus, the Quran and the Hadith, where you can construe wealth to be something that's, very bad, and you can at the same time, take a different set of nusus and make wealth out to be something that isn't, particularly bad, and it's actually a blessing. Like, on the one hand, you could look at how Prophet ﷺ, when he used to sleep on the floor, it was, on the floor, and it was very, it was what we would call complete poverty in our day and age, and how, for many days, his wives and his family would just live off, I think they called it the two aswadain, the two black things, dates, and I can't remember the other one actually.
Water.
Was it water? Yeah, perhaps. And that's just mind-boggling to us, right? Or he would go for 3 days without eating, and have rocks strapped to his body to give him a sense of being full, which is something that we just are not, is just so far removed from where we are. So like, there's a very strong ascetic tradition within our faith, and then at the same time, on the flip side, of the 10 who have been given the glad tidings of Jannah, you have the Abdurrahman ibn Auf, you have Uthman ibn Affan, you have there's a few other Sahaba who are also very wealthy from that list as well, and you have people, of the two people that you could be jealous of in Islam, and it's allowed to have envy of. One of them is a scholar that acts on his knowledge and teaches it, and then the other one is a rich person who earns it in halal way, then he spends it, in the cause of Allah. And then, there's so many verses of the Quran as well where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنفُسَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُم بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has bought from the believers for themselves and from their wealth, and then for them is Jannah. So like on the one side, give me yourself, your body and you and your wealth, and on the other side is Jannah. So naturally, if you have more wealth, you can buy more Jannah, right? It's quite, it's a very, transactional statement. And there are many other verses that we can talk about. And Sulaiman alayhi salam, he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for mulk la yanbaghi li ahadin min ba'di, that give me a kingdom that you will never ever give anyone else after me. He's asking for wealth and power and might. And Yusuf alayhi salam, when he asked that make me the person who runs this thing, and again that's and that was a time of extreme affluence that Yusuf alayhi salam was placed into. Yeah, and I could go on. There's so many other things as well. But I think there's a balancing act between the two things, and knowing yourself in amidst all of that, and being able to navigate your way through it.
What would you say is a problem within the Muslim community that you've encountered with IFG, that you are fully driven to try and solve?
Do you mean economic or otherwise?
Economically. I'm asking because, for example, you might have people who come to you and say, I do want to invest this, but I'm not sure, or I don't know what to do. I'm stuck in a situation, I'm earning X amount per year. I don't know how to go further, but I'm sure you or your team have them kind of conversations with a lot of different people.
Yeah, I'd say that, ambition is something that our community, any community, can probably do more with a dollar more of. I think we sometimes put a cap on ourselves in terms of what could be, and it's slightly getting metaphysical here, but if you think about the craziest kind of outcomes that you can achieve, that others have achieved, at a certain point they envisaged that outcome in order for them to get there. Like, most people did not by accident become wherever there was some kind of intent and some kind of thought behind it. And so the first step to getting to those crazy outcomes is giving yourself that permission to think big enough for that. And I feel like within the Muslim community, especially in the UK, where we're coming still, I think, from a first, second generation, and people are just now getting comfortable, and so they if you've come from a certain socioeconomic background, which Muslims disproportionately come from, then there isn't perhaps that safety net that let's say that your typical white middle class male may have, and they would be able to take those risks and think those crazy thoughts. So I think ambition would definitely be one, and just that risk taking and just being a bit brave. I think those things can help us a lot.
I did a podcast with Cur8, who got recruited in 1992 by Bill Gates, and he mentioned the same thing, where he would write down his goals and he'd repeat it and repeat it. And in his 20s, he would say, I want to own a pro sports franchise. He's now the owner of Leyton Orient, but that's like a side hustle for him. So he's got to the stage and he wrote down, I want to be a millionaire by 30. He said it's 34, but I did it. And he sold one of his companies for $134 million. So, but he said he literally kept thinking about his goals and constantly for him to get that. But we as Muslims have an advantage on top of that, because we can ask Allah every day, and it's as simple as that. And even if the whole point of asking Allah, the whole point of making dua is you ask the crazy things, or you ask for the impossible. That for us is impossible, but we have to have that level of faith that it's not impossible for our Lord.
Yeah.
And I think that's where in business we have to have that faith that yes, we're doing our best, but we can go 10x, 5x, 15, 20x, but by constantly doing what we need to do and asking and praying for it. In South Africa, I think Muslims are like 5th or 6th gen, and a lot of the businesses and families are very successful. But do you think that's because they're 5th and 6th gen, or is it because they probably came into the country when the country was a lot more third world rather than the way it is now? Because obviously London or America, they have much more barriers to entry into business than a third world country would.
What do you think?
I think there's a bit of both. I think the fact that they're 5th and 6th gen, they've got the safety net, as you were mentioning. That's the only reason I thought of it.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for a person to come to London now where it's established and you've got businesses established.
Yeah.
Because if you compare, we do a lot of services. Your business is service industry, my business is service industry. Their businesses are manufacturing, industrial. And they can go direct to government quicker than we can. And obviously them contracts are the ones who everyone goes to.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I don't know actually. I think that each community evolves in its own unique way, because the dynamics are all like, you know, so specific to each country. My sense is that, you know, give us a bit of time and we will get there as well. Like, I feel like there's a lot of potential within the Muslim community. I think that perhaps, and I might be wrong, but I think perhaps those communities over there, a lot of you know, Indian migrants, right? There, particularly from a Gujarati background, in certain communities, I think they really helped each other out, and, you know, looked to do business with each other and just kind of generally be supportive. And I feel like Muslims as a whole perhaps are not as, you know, focused on that as perhaps they could be or should be
over here
in the UK. Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you think that is?
I think that I think it's a cultural thing, you know.
As an Indian Pakistani, like that, or I know that was a thing 20 years ago.
Yeah, and not even so. I think it's a cultural thing across, you know, the Muslim ecosystem. I think, like, you know, certain groups still clump together somewhat, but I think that, you know, it might be a socioeconomic thing as well, where, you know, if you come from, you know, without having very much, you want to protect what you have a lot more robustly than perhaps, you know, you would if, you know, you're already pretty affluent. Like, I think the Jewish community does this very, very well across the world, but particularly well in London and you know, in places like New York and Silicon Valley and places like that. There's a very tight-knit community that looks to actively help each other out in ways that, you know, we don't as the Muslim community. And I feel like that's something that, you know, I personally have been, like, wrestling with as well. Like, what else can or should I be doing, you know, for others in my community or in my space, in the, you know, Islamic fintech space, that, you know, it might be counterintuitive. It might be, like, slightly, you know, uncompetitive to do that, but I should do it as part of this kind of wider narrative. I don't know. Like, I don't know if you've ever tussled with these sort of thoughts before.
From a business point of view, yes. Not really from a community point of view. From a business point of view, it's like we work with other agents to get deals over the line. Or, for example, an investment deal comes and we know this one down the road has a good buyer for it, we'll approach them, or vice versa. So there's a lot of that. Even though it seems uncompetitive, we're still taking our cut. From a community perspective, I think it's important to create like a power team. Essentially, in property we use the word power team. That's why it comes to my mind.
Right.
So, for example, there's a property investor. He has his building team. He has his legal team. He has his finance team. He has his agency as well, and that is his power team. And maybe a similar concept can be applied to not necessarily just Islamic finance, but Muslim businesses or Muslim community in general.
Yeah.
Where you've got, for example, Amazing, who's providing Muslim-to-Muslim platform. Then you've got Tanim, for example, he mentors younger people. And then it's where they're creating a cash flow of £5,000 a month. Where does that go? That can go to Cur8 Capital, and so it's keeping the money within the community.
Yeah. I get what you mean.
But these are just like random. It's like a brainstorming session now. But these are just random things that we can do, and again, it's about finding time, having a balance.
Makes a lot of sense. And maybe there's something around how you can, if you do it not just for the Muslim community but for everyone, you can hit scale a lot more. Like let's say the guys in South Africa did, or Zambia, Malawi, etc. And because most of their customers will be non-Muslim.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, you can unlock scale, which allows the Muslim community as a whole to have a lot more bases covered, which perhaps it wouldn't, if let's say what we do, we obviously purposely brand it as a bit more neutral on the Cur8 Capital side, but if that reaches scale, the only people that really benefit from it, the Muslim community the most, right?
Yeah.
Other ones who come on there and give it that scale, they will have other options ultimately, because the mainstream world has more options. So the Muslims actually are set to benefit the most from that.
Is that why you've partnered with like Flying Butler and was it Mura Living? Is that the reason you've partnered with them? Because they can provide scale, and then it's ultimately the Muslims who've benefit.
Yeah, I think with Mura Living and Flying Butler, they're all subsidiaries, or they're under the Rasmala umbrella, right? And that's an investment bank that we work with, who provide this, the real estate fund that we have on the platform. With Rasmala, it was more that they're Sharia compliant asset manager, and so the Flying Butler, Mura Living subsidiaries that they have, which actually operate the assets, that came, I guess, further down the line. And I think it's a nice thing that it's not just Muslim community
100%
all the way down. I think it's interesting that they've got their own value add, and you see different people working together. I think we should definitely do more of that.
I think that's very important, because when a Muslim has good business values, does good business, automatically, and it's just the way the world has been since 2001, is a non-Muslim would see and think that's a Muslim. They don't think, oh, that's Ibrahim. They think, okay, that's a Muslim. And naturally, it's a good representation of us. Simple thing as holding the door open, it's a Muslim held it open. Or if you don't hold the door open, it's a Muslim who hasn't.
Yeah.
And I think we as a community, we have to realize that we are representing the faith literally every step of the way.
Agreed completely. And I think we should conduct ourselves right in a way that the da'wah is given by our actions, as Prophet ﷺ, as the Quran says, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. That if you were really harsh and really harsh-hearted and stern, لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ, they would have fled from you. فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ, and forgive them and ask forgiveness for them, and شَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, and consult them in the affair, in whatever the thing it is, and that's the other side of it, and the Quran talks about that again, if you treat people right, that those between you who there was enmity and hatred, they will become كأنه ولي حميم, that they will become like your most deepest friend, and a lot of that is really just through conduct. And it really is just through your behavior, and there's so many different examples of that. One powerful example would be the Indonesian people who became Muslims. That it was due to primarily Arab traders who went out there, right? And then what they did was they actually married into the families of those those local communities, the powerful and the wealthy families, and that then embedded Islam at that level, and then it just kind of percolated down, and that was that. And even in the prophetic period, or the early Islamic period, you had people becoming Muslim because of the conduct of either Prophet ﷺ or his companions, which today is it's difficult to think about. Like, to get, to even today, you sometimes see people becoming very impressed by someone's character or someone's conduct, but that's a very high bar to actually think, be that impressed by someone that you change your religion is a very high bar, and that was happening much more consistently in the early Islamic period than it is today. So I agree. I think conduct is so important.
As an entrepreneur, what would you say the intention of an entrepreneur should be Islamically?
I think ultimately the intention should be to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create jinn and mankind except but to worship me, to do that ibadah, to have that state of ubudiyyah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that accepting of His maqam and our maqam, and I think that then manifests itself throughout life, both in our work and our home life, our spiritual life. Now, when it comes to our work life, which is where the entrepreneur comes in, I think it comes down to looking to add value to the world in some way, shape, or form, and solve problems for people. And if a Muslim frames their entrepreneurship in those terms, then that whole activity can become a form of ibadah, a form of worship. Now, if someone thinks I'm going to become an entrepreneur, or let's say the estate agency here, and I'm just I'm just selling houses, that's my thing. That's one way of thinking about it. But the other way to think about it is that there are people out there who need to buy a house. They need a home over the roof over their head, and there are other people who are looking to sell that. And I'm solving that problem by bringing those two parties together and basically creating a marketplace for that, and looking to ultimately add value to people, solve their problems. I think is probably the right way to think about entrepreneurship. I think that on this characterization, the kind of entrepreneurship that I'm perhaps less fond of, but perhaps there is also a need for, is just pure trading entrepreneurship. So where people are trading on, let's say, the stock exchange, or they're just kind of day trading, and they might argue that they're adding liquidity to the platform, and that in itself is valuable. But I feel like I can always think of an alternative way of making a living which is more impactful than that. But in the main, I think pretty much any kind of halal entrepreneurship that is available, when done well, it will be about solving a problem.
Okay, it's quite interesting. So essentially, I think we're born this way as well, to serve our community.
Yeah.
What's next for Cur8 Capital?
And actually, when you said that, I mean, there's a hadith, right? خَيْرُ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ. The best of people is he who serves people and it benefits those people. So, I mean, that's I guess a case in point on the entrepreneurship point. What's next on Cur8 Capital? So I think we have, we're in a position where, we have hundreds of investors coming onto the platform and investing every month. We raise roughly around £2 to £3 million every month now. And I think for us, the big challenge is making sure that we have really clear, product market fit, where, what we're offering today is, private investments across venture capital, real estate, fixed income. I think we can narrow that down and tidy it up and make it a little bit sharper. So I'd love to work on that. And I think that manifests itself to investors or clients in a way that, you see even cooler or even nicer things coming onto the platform that you would really as a no-brainer want to invest in. And then I think it's about product channel fit and really thinking about, where is it that we get most of our investors coming from, and how can we then start thinking about unlocking the growth and the scale in that. And I feel like we've obviously historically been a lot of word of mouth, a lot of referral, a lot of content. But is there, what's the vision, what's the strategy there. I suspect it will end up looking like a lot more content in some way, shape or form, or better quality content. But we might experiment with a few other things. So I think from a business perspective, those are the two things to focus on. In terms of like what I guess the average person wants to hear from Cur8 Capital, there's a whole bunch of interesting things coming. So one thing we're working on is right now banks have been collapsing, and so in the background we'd already been working on this thing called Cur8 Treasury, where with a single investment you can actually diversify your money, into lots of different tier 1 banks that are Sharia compliant, are giving you a Sharia compliant return as well. So if any one bank ever falls, you know that your money is well spread anyway, and isn't going to be caught up in some kind of like liquidation or distribution type issue. Another interesting project that we're working on right now is investing in a ship. So it's a ship worth about $15 million, and shipping is booming right now because of the issues around logistics. And you can make about 30-40% return on ships, and it's obviously an asset that you can insure, and you can put it onto a long lease, and the usual stuff that you can do with assets.
Do ships have capital appreciation?
Not so much, I don't think, is my understanding, but they obviously make a lot.
Yielding assets, basically.
Yeah. And you can refurbish them, and you should be able to unlock a decent amount of capital from that as well, but it won't really appreciate in value. It's like a car in a way, right?
How did you find the ship?
So we have, like, pretty much all of our investments that we do, it all comes back to multi-year long relationship somewhere. So there was a friend of mine who I went to university with. He introduced me to his friend who went to university with. We met many years ago. We've been exchanging messages and sending each other deals or helping each other out in various ways over the years. His family happened to be very large shipping, family based out in India, who had one of the largest shipping companies in the UAE, and they've since been rebuilding their business once again. They exited out and then they rebuilt again, and so this is now their second ship, and so that's how the deal came about. And usually anything that we do will have this kind of, that there are multiple layers of trust and reputation and diligence that go into it. And for me, at the heart of it is all about the relationship, because people can tell you anything.
Yeah.
They can say anything, they can put anything on a piece of paper, but if you know them and you are good at reading them and where their dad lives, that makes it a lot easier to properly do the due diligence.
Someone's less likely to try and do you over, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
What are your plans in UAE?
I mean, there's nothing specific in the UAE. I think it's more of the same. Just that a lot of our type of investor, Sharia sensitive investor, is out there in the Middle East. And a lot of the business partners that we work with, Sharia compliant asset managers, are often out there in the Middle East. And we got into Hub 71, which is this accelerator program. So it kind of just made sense for Mohsin, my co-founder, to spend the year out there to, just recce the land and figure out, what's happening. And if it, seems to be going well at the moment, and if it's, continues to be promising, then we make that, a permanent thing. And if it isn't, then back to the UK we come, to rain and drudgery.
Yeah, I think you'd rather stay over there. But I think the Middle Eastern market is gravitating a lot towards business, not just Dubai. Dubai has been like that for a few years now, but Qatar, Saudi, they're two areas where a lot of people are trying to focus their attention on.
Agreed.
Especially over the next 10 years.
Agreed. I think there's a lot of potential out there. I think it, like with all these things, you just need to figure out how to crack it though. I think it feels like it's deceptively difficult.
Yeah. What's the biggest challenge you've had?
I don't know if there's any one particular challenge that stands out. I think over recent years, it might be, your fundraising. That can be a very stressful period. I think balancing work and family is always a difficult one. I think, coming to the next point in a business's journey where you suddenly feel out of your comfort zone. It's like, you kind of growing and then you kind of hit a plateau, or like you hit a point where you're like, oh, okay, I don't know what's going on anymore. I think those can be challenging periods where you need to tool up again and then get ready to go again.
How do you balance your work, home life? Because you did a post on LinkedIn recently about you have your no phones or nothing between, I think, 6 and 8 or along them lines.
Yeah.
How do you balance it, and how does it feel it works for you?
So I wouldn't say that I'm perfect by any stretch. What I try and do is, for a period of time every evening, you try and give some quality time to, your family and your kids, your wife. And I'm a big believer that if you can give quality over quantity, that's actually what matters. But it's hard, right? As an entrepreneur, I mean, you're also an entrepreneur, so you know this. It's often hard to just switch off completely. I don't think I ever will. I don't think I've ever met an entrepreneur who can properly do that. So at least someone who, certain businesses are lifestyle businesses, and certain businesses are like, this is kind of my all-consuming thing. And I don't think I've ever met an entrepreneur who can properly switch off.
I switched off twice that I can remember. One was in Mauritius. When the first day I got there, my phone fell in the Indian Ocean. So I had no access to anything. I had no choice but to switch off. Second was in Zambia, when there's no data. So again, there's no choice but to switch off.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the best way. You either go somewhere, or you have your phone has to be away from you, or your Wi-Fi has to be off. And nowadays you get Wi-Fi everywhere.
Apart from Zambia.
Yeah, because when you're in a jungle in safari, you're not getting the you're not getting the Wi-Fi.
True. What were you doing in Zambia?
We have family there.
Where were you?
So my dad, we just met his brothers. 2 of his brothers live in Zambia.
Right.
But we had a family get together after 3 years.
I see.
My dad's other family, so we all went to the jungle. We stayed about 7 days.
Safari,
steak. But yeah, basically all of that, fishing. My uncle has a farm as well, so
fishing. Yeah,
fishing's good. We had about 30 fish. My wife somehow first time I caught 12 or something.
Oh wow!
Beginner's luck.
What was the river?
So that fishing we were in a reservoir, but the river we went to was South Luangwa.
Right, interesting. So I've been to Zambia as well on a safari thing.
Which area?
Nyamvu River.
Nyamvu.
Yeah.
Nyamvu's my dad's cousins.
So we went via the Sufyan connection.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Actually, when I went in 2019, Sufyan sent some people from MEND there, and we met them.
That was when
Were you there?
Yeah.
August 2019.
Yeah, I think so.
And then you went to someone's house in Lusaka.
Yeah. Were you there?
Yeah.
Really?
I was there.
We had like steak, I think, that night.
Yeah, there was a braai.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
that's crazy.
Okay, that's not bad, isn't it? And in that, there's a yard and there's a little masjid in the yard.
Yeah. We did salah and I possibly led the salah.
So that house is my dad's mum and sister's house.
Right, I see. Small world.
Yeah, very small. Because I remember there was a guy there, and he's Zaid.
Zaid, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so he was saying, they're from UK, so speaking, I'm from MEND, Sufyan sent us.
Yeah.
Okay, not bad, isn't it?
Mm.
I'll tell my dad that next time I see him. Okay, yeah, so when we stay in that same yard we stay in. My uncle's house is about 2 minutes up the road, so my dad's brother lives there. Oh, in that same yard, but just a 2-minute walk. Because you've got the peacocks and the impalas, and then past that is us.
Ah, I see. Well, I don't think we saw them because it was all dark at the time.
Yeah, you guys came at night.
Yeah.
Did you do the bungee jump?
No.
Okay.
I didn't do the bungee jump because my sense is that the risk reward wasn't there. I'm not someone who like gets particularly fussed about those things, but my wife has said, look, I'm not sure about the safety of those things.
My sister did it.
Oh, really?
She did it when she was like 16. I'm not fond of heights, but when I went to do it, the guy said, "This is Africa, don't trust the ropes." This is like 2006. But my sister's done it. I think a few of my cousins have done it as well.
That's the thing, you see, it's not worth it. Like, if you can get confidence around the safety of it, great.
Do it, yeah.
But it's like, you know, it's one of those things, if it goes wrong, it goes, that's it, game over. And if that's the, you know, if it's one catastrophic outcome, it needs to have a payout that's worth it.
Yeah.
And if the payout is that you're going to solve world poverty, great, I'll take that all day long. But if the payout is just like you feel momentarily happy, like what? What's the point?
And if the risk is you're straight down.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't make sense.
What advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
Don't do the bungee jumping, for a start. What advice would I give? I would say be even more ambitious. I would say that enjoy it. Enjoy the process.
If you're 18 now, what ambitions would you have?
What do you mean? As in, like,
when you say be even more ambitious, so the ambitions you had at 18,
yeah,
obviously they'll be different now. But if you're 18 now, what ambitions would you have with all your experience?
I think I would, for example, I think I would venture into entrepreneurship a lot earlier. I would take a few more swings, I think, early doors, because, you know, let's say in your gap year or year after university, you've got some really good windows to be able to take, you know, pretty large bets on things and have no consequences to them. And so I think that's what I would now do. I'd say, look, you've got a year, you've got 2 years. Don't worry about everything else. Give this a go. If it doesn't work, then do the process and then try again. But if it does work, then you save yourself a decade, because you know, friends of mine who did that, you know, they now have, you know, decent exits, or they now have startups that are, you know, much more advanced in their journey, because that, you know, it takes 10 years to build a business. And if it doesn't work, because it often won't work, at least you've learned a lot more in that process, early doors.
What are some of the things you've learned from your previous mistakes?
I think there's a bunch of things. I think it's often about knowing yourself and understanding, you know, what works for you may not necessarily work for other people. So it's a lot about, you know, team management and leadership, and, you know, giving people the time to, you know, just kind of have that buy-in and get comfortable with what you're doing, pacing yourself and pacing your team at a tempo that is consistent and can be maintained. I think learning about, you know, the value of like meeting in person, the value of you know, sleeping on things, the value of just going with gut instinct when you're making key decisions, I think is like really important. Being a lot more clinical about time, and not being too worried about how it comes across as much, because at a certain point you just need to be like, you know, clinical about time. Loads of things, and I'm still learning.
I think we all are, as we're in business. So the business is always changing, and you're always constantly learning different things. Just a quick fire round before we finish. Favorite food?
Pilau, lamb pilau, I think.
Favorite holiday destination?
Zambia.
Favorite podcast? No, you don't have to say this one.
Favorite
or your one.
Favorite podcast, I would say, is I like a bunch of them. I think I love. There's Grit is a podcast by Kleiner Perkins, which I think is really good. I really like this one that gives really long, like detailed breakdowns, business breakdowns. It's called. There's another one called The Acquired, I think it's called, The Acquired Podcast. Let me look it up. It's great. It is called, Acquired, which gives like 3-hour-long podcasts on a particular business, and it would just break it down, start to finish. They did one on Taylor Swift as a business, for example, or they did one on Andreessen Horowitz, which is a venture capital fund, or they did one on like they'll do random ones on random companies, and they just break it down, the entire history, which is fascinating to kind of, the Times, New York Times, they do one on that.
Okay. What's your favourite book?
Sorry, this is a quick fire round, isn't it? I forgot.
It's okay.
Quick fire. So favourite book I would say is anything by Charles Dickens, David Copperfield, Martin Chuzzlewit, Nicholas Nickleby, anything that he does, these like biography types, and then Harry Potter.
Did you read it from when it first came out? Okay, so did I. I fell out with it though.
Right. Okay.
And favourite day of the week? I'll give you a clue.
Monday, of course.
Or you can say Friday. Or Eid day. This will be released just before Eid.
Yeah. Or I like Saturdays. Saturdays are quite nice.
Yeah, relaxing day.
Yeah.
Ibrahim, thank you very much for taking your time out and coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure.
No, Jazakallah khair for having me.